Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the politics, the practice, and the pedagogies that are happening in public education today. And goodness gracious, we certainly have had all of those things impacting public education because we're in year 3 of the pandemic. And we thought this was going to be the year that we got to come back and sit down next to our friends and be taught by a live teacher. And then we had the Delta variant and not so much. So we've talked a lot in the past weeks about the actual hard impact that politics is having on just public education as a whole, on curriculum, on virtual school, no virtual school, just mask, no mask, vaccines or no vaccine, all of that. And so last week, if you'll remember, we talked about taking some time to reflect over, gosh, what possibly has changed because of COVID permanently, right? And in public education, but we'll be talking about things outside of public education because I don't think you can separate it completely. Public education means that we have kids who need to be not only taught well, but whose parents are involved because they have to take care of that other part of making sure they're mentally well and eating well and helping with the exercise piece and the mindfulness while we also support that at school. So all of these threads are related when it comes to things that have been impacted by COVID and how it may have possibly changed our society in maybe good and bad ways, and that we can already tell in year 3 of education. It's really, it's only been a year and a half, if you can believe that. And let me introduce my guest. We have Kathy Ward is joining us. She's ex-teacher, longtime political analyst. You were commissioner for the Collin County. And so you have that sort of rare combination of having been there, done that, and now helping us in the school business as well. So I've asked you to come on and reflect with us because I think you have, you've been a parent, you are a parent of a current public ed kid. You already had one graduating in college. So you have all those experiences that I think can help further the discussion around gosh, has our world been changed permanently? And it's only been really about 18 months, but
which is crazy, doesn't it? And thank you, Dr. Good, so much for having me on your show again. I love your show. I love that you support the teachers, the educators, the admin, the students, the parents, anybody who has anything to do. And I think from being part of your show and people who follow you, everybody has something to do with education.
Yeah. I mean,
and it is hard to believe we haven't even hit the 2-year mark. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, where we're talking about year 3 in education, and yet we've not really had 2 full calendar years. But it did impact February, the second semester of 1920, and then all of 2021, and now 21-22 has been impacted because of the Delta variant, right? And the mask mandates, vaccines. And so let's sort of get started here. I have a nice article from Time magazine that says these 29 numbers show how COVID-19 pandemic changed our lives over the last year. And, I'm a data person. I just love when they have this. And here's some of the interesting things. And they've categorized this. This one's under relationships, and you'll like this. 269,896 pets were adopted from rescue groups in 2020, which is 36,000 more than normal.
Oh,
and I had heard
that. I love that. I love that.
I had heard that more people had gone to adopt because they were home, right? They were home and they wanted a pet. And so they chose being home and taking the time to rescue. That was great. You'll like this one, initial data from 5 states show that divorce rates have declined during the pandemic about 22%.
Now, see, that's good to know. And I hope it's because people are realizing and learning how to work together and work things out, kind of like we're all in this together versus people not being able to get court dates.
Yeah.
Devil's advocate there.
39% of couples who had planned a 2020 wedding pushed or canceled the reception. 15% postponed the wedding.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. And as far as time, people passed time on puzzles, purchased in triple in 2020, according to Puzzle Warehouse. So 3 times more people.
One of those families.
Are you?
Can't say we did all the puzzles, but there was the purchase of the puzzles.
Yeah. In March 2020, the average adult spent 13.5 hours per day looking at screens, up from 3 hours and 20 minutes from 2019. Shock face, right? No. We were on the devices.
Yeah. Well, that was the only way for so long. I mean, how many meetings did you and I have trying to, introduce people into the legacy charter world? Zoom, the phone, FaceTime, that was our only option.
Well, this is one that certainly we can expand to the public ed as far as in February, starting February, March, we were scrambling to find devices for kids, infrastructure, yes, hotspots. If you can, we pulled off, public education pulled off one of the biggest miracles around, and that is that we got most of our kids in the United States, not even Texas, yes, in the United States. On
which is amazing.
Right. And
is amazing.
Yeah. And so that's
it's something, real quick, it's something that when I look at what folks were able to do in education with technology, anybody who is sitting there, and I know right now there are some teachers who, because they choose to wear a mask or they choose not to wear a mask, depending on where you are on this, you're going on social media and beating your kid's teacher up. Your teacher did everything to keep your kid connected to education. Please don't forget those first few weeks, first few desperate days. Please don't forget everything your teacher has sacrificed. I mean, and again, I'm going to say this. I said this the last time you had me on your show. If you don't think educators are a first responder and they're on the front line, you're crazy.
That's right. And we have sort of gone back to not valuing our teachers. And our teachers are paying us back by quitting. That's another show for another time. Unfortunately, it's coming sooner rather than later to talk about how we have this perfect storm coming up about teachers quitting left and right. They're not going into teaching colleges in the numbers that they were before. Parents are discouraging kids from going to become teachers. And so we're going to, we're going to have a problem in the future. And that's going to change us too, because schools will have to resort more to online. Even though kids are there, they're going to have to be taught by one teacher, maybe in several buildings, with a TA in attendance. If we can't find teachers, that's our future.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think with the decline in people becoming teachers retiring early, I know some folks who are teachers, who are educators, who loved it, and they've said, enough is enough. They're going into other fields, and the kids lose. And nobody else loses. The politicians don't lose. At the end of the day, the parents don't lose. It's those kids that lose, because those good teachers, there are so few teachers out there who just love what they do and who are so good at it. And if we're losing those teachers, we're in a bad position.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that we know something has to change. We don't know yet what it is, but something will have to change. And some of it may have to do with more money, but a lot of it has to do with understanding what we're asking teachers to do and having to restructure it so that it's not so burdensome, because it is. And then they're having oftentimes have a second job to be able to meet other bill needs. So air travel dropped from 4.5 billion passengers worldwide in 2019 to 1.8. So it's more than halved. And of course, you can understand that people are afraid to fly.
Right.
And I flew a lot last year, but I was often able to get my whole row. Nobody was.
Right.
But now it's back. The average household watched 11 hours of streaming video on demand in July, which was nearly double from the year before.
I believe that. I believe it.
Yeah, and public school buildings um, closed to all, which was 50.7 million K-12 students in last March. And today, one out of five of those kids does virtual only. So we've went to really pretty much full time in school to now 20% of kids doing virtual.
Wow.
So that's a new norm.
So in so many changes, and it's interesting because when you first started your show for the school year, when you did your kickoff for the school year, um, it was, hey, everybody's going to be back, and all of a sudden, wait, no, they're not. And then you've got some of these. One of the school districts I spoke with earlier today, they had something like 20% of the kids in the classrooms were out with COVID or being quarantined because they had been exposed to it. Um, we're not back to business as usual. We just aren't. We hate it. Educators and the people in education, I think, wanted more than anything to be back to normal. We're not.
Well, and it's more than that. It's unfortunately, we're still feeling the impact of politics because schools aren't able to operate as they see fit as far as whether to wear a mask, whether to require a vaccine, whether to be allowed to have virtual school for those that have been exposed and get paid for it. Those still are questions. We're in year 3 of that, and those are still questions that are not answered.
Right.
Well, actually, they are answered. They're not going to pay. Unfortunately, right now, in the state of Texas, for example, they are not paying for any type of virtual school. There's a bill out there that if it's passed, it will allow 10% of your school to do virtual, but that's not the point, right? That's
Right.
a 10% of kids who, oh, by the way, they passed the state test last year. They have good grades. They don't have attendance issues. It's not to be used as an emergency pandemic exposure
Right.
opportunity
Right.
to keep kids, going and having them keep up with their schoolwork.
Right.
And I think that hopefully will be coming in the future as our adults, because you've heard me say what's wrong with public education is that it's run by a bunch of adults, right? And those adults oftentimes have agendas, or they have blinders. Even if they don't have an agenda, they have blinders of the way they think things should be, because that's the way it was for them. And look how good I turned out. And if I turned out this well, guess what? Our kids don't look like you anymore, Mr. and Mrs. Politician.
And first of all, you need a bumper sticker that says that, because every time you say it, I'm like, I know what she's saying, and she's right. And then also it's, and I kind of think you heard back when I was growing up, oh, well, I walked to and from school uphill both ways, barefoot in the snow, kind of a thing. And if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for you. Really, again, I wasn't born with an iPhone, or some device in my hands. I mean, I remember when Atari came around, that was like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest invention ever. We've got Pong and then Super Pong. But kids nowadays, I mean, they've got devices that are teaching them how to read at younger ages than ever. So it is a different world. And I think in education, for some reason, Dr. Good, we have adults, we have a really hard time. We're so slow to change, and we're so slow to accept that there are changes happening. So are we hurting the kids who could be curing cancer and colonizing Mars?
Those are all good questions. If we could get change agents in public school systems to all agree that maybe not taking 30 years to change, because I've heard that since I started in 1986, that it takes 30 years for things in education to change.
Yeah.
And you can almost say that I've lived that, because when I started 35 years ago, we had the textbooks that you gave out at the beginning of the year. And if you'll remember, you would give out those book guards that were, if you didn't have the kids do it at home with the grocery bags, remember, you would cover books with a grocery bag.
Book covers with either, there was some kind of it was almost like that butcher paper.
Yes.
Oh, those were the greatest things ever.
And then advertisers started saying, hey, no, we'll advertise. And then we want you to put these book covers. So the kids had the book covers. You open the book, you start at chapter 1, you read the chapter together, and then you have the kids answer the question, blah, blah, all of that. That was 35 years ago. And unfortunately, we still have teachers who come in wanting to do that.
Yes. Yeah. And you're right.
Even,
Or remember SRA,
ah,
where you had the color coded box
yes.
system. And while I think back, and obviously, I love to read. I couldn't wait to read a chapter and then do the thing at the back of the book and then find out if I got a good grade. I loved all that. But then my kids, now they had some of that. I will say that they did have some of that. But look at all of the inventions that have happened since I was in school, since you were in school.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that should be such a thing of the distant past, like phonics books. That was greatness, but now there's other ways to learn that.
Well, and again, this is where politics will rear its head. It was something like phonics, because people will say, I don't think kids are getting enough phonics, darn it. So we're going to mandate that kids be taught phonics. And now in Texas, you have reading academies where it's mandated that all K-3 teachers, I believe, or K-5 teachers must go through the reading academy, at least the ones that are teaching ELA, English.
Right.
And they must do that by a certain year. And they're being taught phonics and hopefully a combination of other than phonics, because again, we tend to, be one way or the other, when in fact, when I started 35 years ago, that was the balanced literacy, where you were taught both phonics and, sort of the
sight reading or whatever it was.
Yes. Yeah. So we tend to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? All or nothing. And that's one of those practices in public ed that needs to be recognized and stopped.
Right.
Let's see, ebooks and audiobook checkouts versus via the public library app were up 51%.
Wow.
If you can believe it. Well, people were home, right?
True.
And so they couldn't go to the library.
I read more just being at home more. I think sheer boredom sometimes drove things like that. But hey, if it gets people back to reading and expanding their minds again, that's good.
Well, one thing that I've had shows on it about public libraries, and people tend not to remember our little jewels that are sitting in our neighborhoods that now we can go to again. The public libraries, they have, people should be, there are a couple of places that people should be monitoring at least once a month. And that is that maybe at the beginning of every month, they should go to both their city calendars and their public library calendars, because they will learn of upcoming events, speakers, just things that fascinate adults and fascinate kids. And, and the information being brought is brought by experts in their field. And it just really, really makes sense to know when those things are happening, but people, they don't think about that. And so that part of my constant re-information to help people remember to do that, because normally there's either no cost or very little cost. They'll bring authors. I remember going to the Allen Library a couple of years ago maybe, and there was a comedian who, I can't remember his name, but he wrote a book, and of course he was hilarious. And it's good to feed your mind and your soul, and that no matter what age you are. Right. And do it with experts in their field. So that's something we probably could all get better at. So here's the new category of well-being. So while 1 in 6 health clubs and gyms closed in 2020, Peloton, you know who Peloton is?
Oh, yes, the bicycle folks.
Yeah, quarterly revenues went up 172% at the end.
Oh, yeah.
My daughter
has one like that. Yep. Oh, yeah.
I tried at the beginning of the pandemic. I looked into getting one, but it was going to it'd take like 4 months to get it. And I went, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I should have gone ahead and done it, but who knew what we were up against?
Right.
78% of Americans delayed at least one medical service in the 3 months leading up to February 2021. And we know that.
Yep.
Worker burnout among U.S. employees at large companies jumped from 42% pre-pandemic to 72%.
Wow. Is that because of the lack of interaction? Because a lot of people were working from home, do you think?
Those that would be really good to really investigate, because I know that we could say the same about our teachers. If you
Right.
remember last year, yes, we were allowed to have kids back in school, but what did we ask our teachers to do? To teach virtually and face to face.
They were literally, and that's another thing, just, and I know I keep jumping on this, but I think it's so important to remember. So teachers were, it's basically like you had a classroom, on one side of the hall and another classroom on the other side of the hall, and you were running back and forth between the two. Everybody's like, well, you just do the same thing in person that you're doing to the kids. No, you are teaching. Those are two different teaching styles that have very different approaches. And again, somehow teachers did that.
And
God bless
well, the good ones did.
them.
Unfortunately, there were many teachers who, because I saw it, I was walking classrooms last year and I saw and was very concerned about the fact that we had kids there, but they were all online. They're all there with their computers,
Right,
and the teachers at the desk, and she's or he's online, doing both. Right, they're monitoring and they're doing the same thing for both audiences, and so there was still a lack of. There was so much hesitancy about getting up and getting near kids,
yes,
right?
yeah,
So that teachers protected themselves
right,
from, with all this hoopla, because many believed that we shouldn't have opened as early as we did, and there were varying philosophies about opening schools, and so you had lots and lots of opinions, and the
right,
way those opinions played out in classrooms, and that oftentimes you had very reluctant adults who did not want to get near kids, and
right.
to literally put up barriers, plexiglass between them and the kids, and there's a lot of psychology that happens with that
You're
too.
right. You're
It's like,
right. Well, even as an adult, you know, I, I don't know if I'm saying a secret I shouldn't, but you and I both frequent a nail salon, and and so going back, it was, first of all, was very glad to be back in a nail salon. I'll be the first to admit that. But going back, and there was plexiglass between, and sometimes when you go to the same nail person, you become friends with that person, and it was, for me as a person in my 50s, it was jarring for me to have the plexiglass, and I understand the rationale behind it. I understand it was for my own safety and the safety of the employees. But when you're a kid, that's a very complex thing to deal with.
well, and as is, being in K3 or pre-K3, and the brain and the eyes work together to watch another person's mouth as they speak
Right,
to
right,
help understand what they're saying. We
right,
all do it. Actually, all of us do that. We subconsciously do that. And so when we're all wearing masks, it makes it harder, especially if it's muffled and so forth. I know I fussed at my husband. He's fussed at me about mumbling, because when we're wearing our mask. But imagine being in school and trying to teach, especially dyslexic kids, you know, special
oh,
ed kids.
yeah, special ed kids, especially, and it was interesting. One of the moms on one of the social media sites that I follow, and she happens to be a friend of mine from college. She has a special needs daughter, and her daughter, with, you see this mask. Well, okay, I guess I know somebody's smiling at me if I see their cheekbones. Like right now, I could cover your mouth up, and you've got great. First of all, you've got great cheekbones, by the way, but I can see when yours raise up to smile.
Yeah,
So
my lines.
it's no. I'm talking about, you've got great cheekbones. Let's just go with that. And so, but she was saying how her daughter, not seeing that smile on her teacher's face when she got something right or when she read something, and the teacher's like, "That's awesome," that big smile, she would automatically assume that everything she had just done or everything she had just said was incorrect. Now that her teacher has the ability to lower that mask when her teacher is working one-on-one with her, she said it's made all the difference in her daughter being happy to be in school
Hmm.
versus just fighting going to school, even online or in person. being able to see somebody's entire face we're human beings. We're used to seeing the entire face.
So let's see. We are. Time is never our friend on these shows, Miss Kathy. Let's talk a little bit more about things in school, for example, that supposedly are being impacted by COVID. And that is something that I had brought on your show this week. And that is now the Department of Ed is asking schools to consider looking at grading in a different way based on the pandemic, based on the way that kids have been traumatized by the pandemic. It is their contention that grades can traumatize, and kids don't need more of that trauma. So we should consider moving away from the old-fashioned grading system of grading things during a 6 weeks. Sometimes it's 9 weeks, but let's talk about 6 weeks.
Okay.
We get activities, we get tasks, we get assignments, homework, and the kids turn them in and we give them grades, right? And oftentimes, and I'll use because of time not being our friend, I'll use a worst case scenario. Let's say that you, Kathy, have come into my classroom. You're a secondary student. You've been really demoralized by having to stay home. This year's the first year you've been at school for a year and a half, and you just don't, you're uncomfortable at school because of the social distancing and mask thing, and you just aren't doing your best as far as school-wise. You're trying to figure it out after a year and a half of being home. And so your grades are suffering a little bit. You're not connecting with your teachers as much as you had in the past because your hormones are, it's just that part of your life. And so you were late on a few assignments, and your grades in the beginning of the 6 weeks were not where they should be as far as passing or B's and A's and B's, what you're comfortable with normally. And so you and I sit down together, we come up with a plan. We get your parents in on it. We all are agreement about the plan, and then you start executing the plan. You start coming to tutoring, and you start coming to if we have any other opportunities to extra work so that you can get your grades up. And so by the end of the 6 weeks, your grades are high C's and B's more regularly than they were at the beginning. But if I were to sit down and do the old fashioned averaging your 6 weeks worth of grades, you're probably going to get a 68 or 69 because the light bulb sort of turned on. As a teacher, it was the first 6 weeks of school. I didn't sit down with you until probably the third 6 weeks because I saw that your progress report was going to not be great. And I didn't want you to be surprised. So that third 6 weeks before you got the progress report, I alerted your parents that you were failing. And that's the way it's supposed to work, right?
Right.
But it doesn't give you but about 3 weeks to then automatically start churning out much better grades.
And there may not be enough assignments to help you overcome that. Well, then does that keep me out of the college of my choice?
So what the Department of Ed is asking us to move towards, and it's very difficult. Think about your very structured AP teacher, right?
Yes.
And that's something else that's going away, by the way, pre-AP and AP.
I can't wait till you do that show. I'm ready for that.
But and so that their thinking is going to be very, very traditional. And they get the grade that they earned, end of story. But what the Department of Ed and other grading gurus, it's not only them, they're not making this stuff up. Other grading gurus are saying, hey, folks, if your kid implemented the plan you sat down with them to do, and they're now showing mastery at the end of 6 weeks, do you then punish them by?
Oh, that's tough.
That is tough, isn't it?
Wow, that's something we've got to think about. And then that leads me, and again, this is a whole nother discussion for a whole nother day. Like you, I'm a really big fan of PBL, project-based learning. So do we start to go away from the traditional 55-minute lecture answer the questions, do the assignment, you either cut it or you don't, or do we go towards teachers collaborating, bringing in outside experts? I don't know. This kind of makes me think, well, then all of a sudden project-based learning really looks good. Plus you're gaining life skills like presentation skills, working with people who are above your pay grade, people who have expertise in other areas. I don't know. That's a
So,
tough, that's a head scratcher, Dr. Good.
so these are all things that I'm putting on your radar, putting on everyone's
Yeah.
radars to be on the lookout. We'll talk more about it, but certainly uh, COVID has forced changes everywhere, as we saw, the schools included. My hope is that we can get the schools to work a little bit faster than 30 years to implement positive changes, and that we will see those changes coming up in the next 3 to 5 years based on the data of what we've learned on using virtual school as a possible tool, not the only tool, but a possible
A
tool
tool.
in our repertoire.
Yeah. Lots to think about.
Well, as always, our time together has flown by, and I thank you for
We
being
just
on.
started.
I thank you for being on
Well,
and
thank you
adding
for
to the
having me. I
discussion.
always love being on your show.
Well, thank you. Next week, we're going to have a returnee. It's a Indian lady who's written her second book, and she reached out after her first book. She writes positive books, and so I thought it would be time to have some positive stuff coming and some people who can maybe give us some tools to help us stay positive, because we still need them. We still
Amen to
need them.
that.
So thank you
Dr.
again,
Good.
everyone. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.